Hello everyone, welcome to week 7. Again, I apologize, it's gotten a little warm here in Klamath Falls where I'm at, so you might hear the drone of my air conditioner in the background. If you do, just try to ignore it. But this week, we are going to talk about the DOM. I was going to make a joke about Dom DeLuise, but I figured I was aging myself a little bit. So, let's find out what that is. So in this chapter, because this goes over chapter 9, it's going to cover the document object model, which is your DOM, and then how that's used to manipulate your web pages, how it handles events, and then how it handles regular expressions. So we're actually splitting that up over weeks 7, 8, and 9. And then week 10, we're going to talk a little bit about APIs and a little bit about React. So that'll be chapter 10. And then this week's lab, we are going to just keep kind of messing around with JavaScript. This lab, we're going to learn about parsing JSON files into JavaScript to manipulate web pages. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So what is the document object model? So this is just like a breakdown of what it is. And it's basically the model that shows how your website builds. Okay? So you have and we're going to go over this in the next couple of slides. I'll keep referring back to this. But you have your document root, which is all of the HTML on the page. So everything on that page is your root. And then below that, it's split up into nodes. And it's just like a flowchart or the little tree here, to where nodes can have parent nodes and child nodes and sibling nodes. And we'll go over that. So on the left is the HTML output, and then on the right is that visual representation of it. Okay, so nope, stop it. Okay, let's do a thing here. Let's just kind of scooch that up a little bit. There. Okay, so I changed the theme before I present these, because the themes are always just like terrible white, but that kind of affects the spacing sometimes, so that's why we gotta move stuff. So DOMs are made up of nodes, and all of the collections of nodes is a node list. These are basically vocabulary words. This is something that you have been dealing with from the very beginning, from the class before. These are just the proper names for them. Okay, so each element within your HTML is a node. So all of your p tags, all of your a tags, all of your image tags, those are all nodes. Those are element nodes. And then all of those nodes together is your node list. And within the DOM, the model that we're looking at, you can affect that just like you could affect an array. So remember, an array is kind of this dimensional, not really a list, but collection of things, right? So a lot of what we do in JavaScript is finding these nodes within our HTML and then modifying them. So things like dynamically generating content, or listening for somebody to click a button, or submitting forms. Those are all tasks that involve a node and a modification of some kind. And we're going to go over the different... Well, we're not really going to go over the different types of nodes, but we're going to go over the properties of nodes. But just know that... and your book goes over this. So you have your element node, which is your tag, and within that tag you may have an attribute, and you may have a text node. So your attribute is anything that's within those less than and greater than signs. That's an attribute of that element node. So if we look at our a tag, the actual itself up here in the HTML, so this is our element node is just the A. The href is a property, or sorry, misspoke, an attribute of that element node. And then everything that goes in between the opening and closing is your text node for it. So in the P tag here, the P is your element node. And then the photo conservatory pond and the A tag are part of that parent node. So going back up here, these are parent nodes. Anything that's contained within that are child nodes. And anything that are on the same level are called sibling nodes. All right, so let's look at some properties. So again, not something that you have to remember, just be kind of familiar with it so it doesn't surprise you if it comes up. And the text has a much longer explanation of it. But what you need to know is that a child nodes is the node list. So again, that collection of all of the child nodes for a particular node. So in that example that we were looking at, the parent node being that P tag, the A tag would be a child node of it. And if that was the only tag that was in there, that child nodes node list would just contain that A tag. First child is the first one in that relationship. So if we had several other tags in there, like within that paragraph we had the A tag and then an image tag, the first one is your first child. Makes sense, right? Last child is the exact same. It is the last child node right before the closing tag. The next sibling is if you are within a tag and you're moving between sibling nodes, so siblings are on the same level, it's just the next one, and it's top down. So, if we go back up to our example here, if you look at the HTML, within the body is where I'm going to look. So the body is a parent node, but all of these H1, the P tag here, the image, those are all child nodes, okay? And when comparing them to each other, they're all sibling nodes, right? So if you did a first child, if you look at this HTML here, the top one, the first child node would be your H1 tag. And if you did last child, you grab the last thing right before the closing tag. So it would be this div tag right here. And it goes by levels, right? That's why it's not the P tag that's within this div. If you're doing the last child of the body, it is that level 1 down from it. Not the continuous levels down, just the level 1. Okay? So let's go back here. The node name is the name of the node. So we'll get into that in a little bit. The node type is the type, and then the node value is value. These are obviously kind of, you get it, right? Just from the name. This is why you try to name things in a way that makes sense so that people can look at it and be like, oh, I get it. Parent node, yes. Previous sibling, the if you go back up the list instead of going down it, that is the previous sibling node. And then the text content is any text stripped of any tags of that node. So you strip out all of your divs, your A's, your images, all of that, and it's just the text content. Make sense? Cool. All right. I gotta pop this up a little bit. Boop. Okay. So, this explanation right here. Oh. There you go. This explanation right here is the most bizarrely confusing explanation out of the book that I have seen. What it says is the DOM document object. So remember, DOM stands for Document Object Model. So the document object model document object is the root JavaScript object representing the entire HTML document. You use the document object for reference. Okay, so what does that mean in non-academic language? So when you are referencing the whole of the page, you are referencing the DOM document. And the way that you do that is by putting document in your JavaScript. So if we look down at the, skipping that second paragraph for now, if we look down at the example here, if you want to retrieve the URL of the current page, you do document.url. And that's just saying, look at this entire page of HTML below us. And within that whole document, what is the URL of it? The next one below it is saying, look at that whole HTML of the page, and what is the encoding of it? Remember, we've been using UTF-8, 8, not H. And then the properties of the document cover information about that page. So some things you can only reference, but some things you can modify. Okay? So that's all that this page is saying, is that if you want to look at the whole document, you're going to reference the DOM document object. And the way that you do that is that you put document dot in whatever the property is, or using your square bracket notation, document left square bracket, you got to use quotation marks, whatever property you're referencing, and then end your quotation in your square brackets. That's all this slide is saying. Okay. So, in addition to properties, there are things that you will be using all the time. So, think of document.write, which was writing HTML into the HTML document. Think of document.getElement by ID or getElements by class. Those are all methods that you are using to grab information from that document. Okay? They fall into 3 categories. The first one is selection methods. So those are things like getElement by ID. We're going to go over it in the next slide. I'm getting ahead of myself. There's family manipulation methods. So document write is like those. They're manipulating your document. And then event methods, which we are going to go over next week. But basically, you're looking for some sort of precipitating event, so something to happen, and then when that happens, do this thing. Okay? So let's look at selection methods. So these are the ones that you are going to use the most of all. So they just go in, they look at that document, and they grab a thing. Okay? And remember, we got to have document dot. So the ones that we use the most are getElement by ID, which is why another reason why in your HTML to use IDs and classes. getElements by class name, and getElements by tag name. So here's the thing. This is why there's a difference between ID and class. IDs are supposed to be unique, period. You're only supposed to have one of any particular ID on any one document. So you can't have a ton of things with the ID of, in this case, latest. Because for selecting through that document method, you can only grab one. If you are needing more than one of a thing, you have to have a class. So getElements by class name, and the reason that I am emphasizing here is because when I was starting out, I constantly forgot that it was plural. Grabs all of the things that have that class name. And you can either set it to a list or to an array. because there is more than likely going to be more than one, and a just single variable cannot hold more than one. So it's going to set it to a list or an array. And then the last one is get element by tag name. And those are your tags that either do have a class or don't have a class. But they are your upper level tags. So things like body or div or h1 or p or image or a, any of those, header, any of the tags themselves, you can grab that. And again, it's a get elements, so it's going to create either an array or a list. Put them together. So that's the selection methods. This is a newer method, and it's not something that I've particularly messed with very much, but it's pretty cool. So the query selector and query selector all does it just like referencing CSS. Think of it that way, okay? So in this example here, query selector is when you have one of a thing, right? Query selector all is when you have multiple of a thing. So we have query selector in the middle, in the green, we have query selector, and then open parentheses, and then quotations, and then main and time. Now the reason that main has that hashtag or pound sign in front of it is because it's looking for an ID. If you were looking for a class, you would have a period there. If you were just looking for a div, you would just have the div, the word div. And then you use your greater than symbol to say that go find this thing that has an ID of main and look within it and find the child of the thing that is named time and grab that. And then if you want, and it's only going to grab the first because it's a one thing. Okay? And then it's going to, if you look at the red over on the right, you have a query selector all. It's going to say, hey, within those main, that with an ID of main, and then if there's a div within it, and then if there's something called time within it. So it's the difference between grabbing the first of a thing or the one thing that fits that thing and grabbing all of them. So just kind of think about that if you want to use query selector or query selector all. Also notice that you don't have to remember whether or not it says get elements by ID or, nope, I said it wrong. Get element by ID or get elements by class name. It's just a simpler way to do it. You just got to remember that if you're using an ID, you use the pound sign or the hashtag. If you're using a class, you use the period or dot. And then if you're just using a tag, then just put the tag. Okay. So this is what I was kind of talking about. An element node. So an element node is just an object within your HTML that is between the opening and closing. Okay? So if we hop back up to our fifth slide, well, it's not really slide 5, it's like slide 2, 3. So let's just go ahead and change that. Doing it live. Okay. So if you look at your book on table 9.1, or we're going to hop back up, every element node has certain node properties, and then oh wait, that's not slide 3, that's slide it is slide 5. Oops. Okay, my bad. Anyways, every element has the node properties. So node name, node type, text content, parent node, if it has anything within it, child node, next sibling. All of those are things that every node has. Every element node. there are also extra properties. So let's take a look at some of the essential ones and then some of the extra ones. Okay, so essential element node properties. Class list. So if you want to know all of the classes that are the CSS classes that a particular element has, that is how you can grab that. It is also what you use to add and remove classes to it. So last term, when we were doing our gallery and we had it to where it would open and close, that toggle was using class list, right? Class name is the value of the class, right? It's the name of the class. ID is if it has an ID, that's what it is. Inner HTML is all of the content of that element. So everything between that start and close, including the text and the tags. So not just the text content, which remember was taking the tags out, but everything. And then the style is all of the CSS properties of that element, which we can use to add and remove certain styles instead of adding and removing certain classes. And then the last one is the tag name itself. So thinking back, if you have an A tag, that's, your href equals google.com, right? The tag name would be A. And then let's look at the properties for it. Okay, so certain types of tags have certain extra properties. Not every tag has extra properties, right? So we're going to be looking at the types of tags on the right side of that table. And those are the ones that it applies to. So href is a property or an attribute that's used in A tags to put your link in. That's where your link goes, your URL. It's like, hey, I'm referencing this URL here. This is where I need to go. A, input, text area, and form have a special property that is called name. And if you think back to last term, when we made our contact form, the input areas had a name of a certain thing, and that allowed us to group them, right? Or target them certain ways. So if you're looking at a form, it might have an ID and a class and a style, but it might also have a name. Source, images, inputs, iframes, and scripts. And it's just, instead of a link, it's a thing that's loaded. So a link takes you out of where you are and goes somewhere else. A source is go out, grab this thing, and then load it into the page. So that's why it's used for images and inputs. Iframes are where you basically take another website page and put it into your page. It's a page within a page. That's how, if you have to embed a form or embed a YouTube video, those are a lot of them using iframes. And then scripts, go out and grab the script and load it. And then value is so this is going back to our forms, which we're going to go over in a couple of weeks. So the name is the name of the thing, and then the value is whatever that person puts in. So it's the input, the text area, and the submit. So if somebody is typing in something, you're grabbing that value. It grabs that user's input. For submit buttons, it's basically, I think it's saved as a bool, which is like a true or false, or having a value or not a value. But either way, you've got to grab that to make sure that somebody's clicked your submit button, right? Alrighty. So again, this is stuff that you've been dealing with up to this point. These are just the explanations for it. Alright. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at accessing elements and their properties using the DOM, so that document object model. So what are the things that I want you to notice here? So we're going to look over the HTML. So this is your HTML, and then it's got a script in it. Okay? So we've got a p tag with an ID of here. It's got some contents in it. It's got a span there. Got an unordered list with some list items. We got a div with an ID of main. A link that's going to somewhere.html that is containing a link. Nope. Containing an image. And then the closing div. And then we get your script here. So let's look over this. So the first thing we're doing is we're creating a constant, so a variable that's a constant, it's not going to change, and it's going and looking at that document, that DOM document object, and it's saying, hey, within that document, go grab the element that has the ID of here. So if we look up here, well, which element has the ID of here? Well, our p tag right up here, that first paragraph, has an ID of here. And then when you have that, what we're going to do, that sets the variable, we're going to, in the console, log it. So it's going to write out in the console, what is the inner HTML of that node? And then below it, what is the text content of that node? So remember, these are both properties, inner HTML and text content. Text content strips out any of the tags. Inner HTML is everything that's between that opening and closing, even if it has child tags. So that's the big difference here. So the top one is their inner HTML, and it grabs everything, that hello, the span, the there, the closing span. The other one, the text content, just grabs the hello there. Okay? And then let's look over here. So we're setting another variable called items. And that is going to look at the document and get all the elements with the tag name of list item. So it's going to grab all of the things that have list item on it. Okay? And it's saving it as an array. And then we're having a for loop here that's saying, you know, we're setting an iterator, setting it to 0, and for the amount of, if it is less than the number of items, then add on 1 to it and do this thing. Okay? And then the thing that we're doing is whatever the item is at that indexed, we're writing the text content. So what it's going to put out is the first time it runs, it's going to put out France. And then the next time it runs, it's going to put out Spain. And then the last time, it's going to put out Thailand. And because there's no more left, then it's going to stop, right? Pardon me, it was a little parched. Same kind of thing here. So this is using that query selector, right? So we're going to create a thing called link, and we're going to look in the document and grab what is in the main, the something with an ID of main, and then the a tag. So we find our ID of main here, and within it, we're grabbing everything that's in that a tag, right? And then since it's a link, we have those special properties. So it's saying within that variable, everything that we've grabbed within that a tag, if there's an href, put what that is. And so it's going to console log or write out in the console where that link leads. So in this case, somewhere.html. Same thing here. We're creating a variable called image using the query selector. So notice you didn't have to say elements by tag name or element by ID. We're just doing the query selector. Same thing, we're looking for an ID of main, and if it contains an image in there. And then we're going to write out the source of it. So remember, source is like an href, but instead of linking out to somewhere, it's grabbing something and bringing it in. So it's going to put out the source, which is whatever.gif or GIF, whichever one is fine. And then the last thing, we're still using that image variable because it's grabbed everything within that A. And then go and look, and if it has a class name, what is that? So our image tag here has a class name of thumb. So it's going to put out thumb. So that's some of the ways where you can go and grab an element, which is what we've been doing previously in our previous lab. We went and grabbed an element and then we're modifying them, right? So, modifying the DOM. Now, you can go out and grab the node and the properties of that node. What do you do with it? Well, you've already kind of done it, but let's talk about it in more depth. So you can change an element style. You can change the content of a given element. And you can do that using several different ways. Okay? So the first thing we want to talk about is changing an element's styles. So this is not adding and removing a class, and it's not affecting your CSS strictly. This is something that is basically, think of it as adding like an inline style to it. Okay? So, and just for your reference, programmatically just means that it's doing it through scripting versus writing it in explicitly. So you're programmatically or writing it in a script to modify the styles by using the style property. So if we look at the example here, we have a variable called node, and it's going out and getting some element within a document with an ID of some ID. And then what we're doing is we're manipulating that element. And the way you do that is you do your variable and then dot style, and then the next part is a little bit tricky. It is whatever property you would be changing in your CSS, but without spaces and with camel case. So camel case is lowercase first word, uppercase second word. So if it's just a thing like color, you can just do color, but there's a reference online, and I will make sure to put it up in our resources so that you can see all of the different selectors for that. Okay, but what we're doing here is changing the background color to a certain color and then changing the border width of that element to a 3-pixel border. Okay, so this is a just kind of expanding on what I was talking about. So it's the difference between using an inline style and using a CSS file. So you can use the style property, but in general, it is better to use class name or class list to add and remove, right? Because if you do it with the dot style instead, it's not modular. It's every element that you're wanting to add that to, you have to do that copy and paste that dot style and then whatever you're changing. Whereas if you in your CSS create a class, then you just have to add and remove that class, which is what it's showing here. So the way that you do that is so class name adds, class name replaces, and then you can use class list remove to add and remove. So the big thing on these are to look at the numbered examples on the right. Nope, stop it. My mouse wheel is dumb sensitive. Okay, so the first one, it's just replacing it. So if we look at our main div up here, we have a div with a class of box. So if you use node.className equals yellowish, what it's going to output instead is not div class box, is going to be equivalent to div class yellowish. Okay? And then if we remove yellowish, it's going to be empty. It's not going to go back to box. We have to add box back in. So that's what 2 is. So that's using class list removed and class list add. But if we already have box there, and we don't want to replace it, we want to keep that first one. But we want to add another one to it. Well, we're not going to use class name. We're going to use class list add. And that adds it on. It's called appending, but it adds it on to the last thing of it, right? So that's what it's done here. Node.classlist.add, yellowish. So now we have a class list, or classes of box and yellowish. Now, the cool thing is that JavaScript built in, using class list, has something called a toggle. And what a toggle is using the classes, it looks and it says, hey, is this class already on here? And if it isn't, it adds it. And then if it is already on there, then it takes it away. So that's example 4 and 5. So it's saying toggle with a class of hide. And it didn't have that class before, so it added it. And then again, and it already had the class of hide there, so it took it away. So toggle is really, really cool. It is really easy for making things like accordions, or when we used our image gallery to do the light box to pop it up and out. Toggle is what you use for that. Okay? Alright. So, this goes back to the difference between inner HTML and text content and DOM manipulation. So, you can grab what's in an element either through its inner HTML, which grabs everything, remember, even the extra tags within it, or you can grab its text through the text content, but you can use inner HTML to replace content. This is generally preferable to using document write, because the thing has to exist, but then you can add to it. So it just replaces content. So what this is we're creating a div, or a variable named div, grabbing it with the ID of main, and then setting the inner HTML, so anything between that div with the ID of main opening tag and closing tag, replace it with this. So it would create a link with an image in there. And again, this replaces. It does not add to, it replaces. Okay. So using inner HTML is something, let's talk about security. Let's talk about safety, right? If you use inner HTML, you are writing into the HTML of your page. Now you've seen with the console here that you can change that, right? So even though it's used sometimes, if vicious scripting, so cross-site scripting, XSS attacks are basically where where like a malware script or some sort of bad scripting is introduced and is now co-opting that inner HTML and rewriting it. So in practice, when you need to change the text of an element, use text content instead. And then when you need to make HTML elements, let's talk about what you want to use instead. We're going to talk about it in like 2 slides, okay? So just know that inner HTML is a cool thing. In general, for live stuff, try to use it as sparingly as possible. Okay, so this is important for the next one, okay? Because the DOM is read top down. So think of the family. We have our DOM family. And think about our properties, right? So we have parent nodes, which is our top level of whatever level. Each of them has child nodes. So the next level down is our children, but childs. The first child is the first one that appears. The last one is the last one right before that closing tag. And then they are all siblings. So you can step through them using next sibling and previous sibling. So just keep that in mind, right? All right. Here are DOM manipulation methods. So these are generally preferable to using inner HTML. Okay? So we have append child, which adds a new, this is where I was talking about append. So append adds it to the end of whatever node you're in. So let's look at our previous slide. So this last child would be this div here. So if we used append child, then it would add something right after that closing div tag. Okay? Create attribute creates a new attribute node. Things like remember like your href, stuff like that. Create element, creating a new HTML element node. Text node creates a new text node. And then these are just ways to change where it's inserting, because again, append does only to the end. So this looks for a thing. You have to have a selector first, and then puts it next to it. So either previous next to, or so previous after, that kind of thing. Parent or child. Adjacent, same kind of thing. It's a new text node at the element versus text. And then before the reference node, so it's like the opposite of append. And then remove. So remove and replace. Removes a child node, replaces a child node. That's remove child, replace child. Okay? So those are, again, kind of just words. Let's take a look at what that actually means. Okay. So what we've got here is we have our HTML right here. And then we've got a create a new text node. So we've got a variable called text, and then we're using document create text node. This is dynamic. Okay. So that would pop that in right at the bottom. Okay. And then we're going to see it in just a second. And then we've got a constant of p of create a new element with a p tag. So, so the blue is your content, the red is your tag. We're going to use them in conjunction. Okay? All right. So we're going to add the text element to our the text content to our p element. So the way that we do that is p append child with our variable text. So this is what we have now. We have an opening p tag, the text content of this is dynamic, and then your closing p tag. And then, so now that we built that, that's really, really cool. How do we get that in there? Okay. So the way that we do that is we have to first go out and select a thing. So we're creating a variable called first, and we're looking at this document, and we're saying get the element with the ID of first. So that's what this is right here. Ignore that red P. This is the ID of first. Right now it has two children, an H1 and a P, DOM example, and then existing element. And then once we've grabbed the thing, we can mess with it. So it's saying take that element and append append a child of our variable of p. And so what happens is it's going to slot in that p tag with our content. This is dynamic. A lot of dynamic web pages do this. So if you ever talk to somebody and are like, yeah, this page is dynamic, it's getting the information from the cloud, this is all it's doing. It's a script that lives on a server somewhere that is creating these elements within it and then putting it into the web page instead of writing inner HTML. Instead of replacing, it's just adding it in. So it's something that's really cool, but like if someone's trying to hype it up to you, you know how to do it now. You can make a lot of money doing it. Okay. So this is actually our last slide. And it's kind of the most important. You cannot access or modify the document until the document has been loaded. All right? Yeah. So, that's just saying that until it goes out and grabs that HTML, you cannot change or modify or grab or search or whatever that HTML. If you think about it, it makes sense. But this is where you're going to get the undefined errors, right? So the thing has to exist before you can go out and look for it or change it. This is going to be really, really important when we get to event handling. But just know for now that timing of any scripting is really, really important. You have to make sure that the thing is loaded before you can change it. All right? So we've got a lab this week. The lab is going to be, again, parsing in a JSON file, which means reading in a JSON file. And then we're using document write instead of the methods that we just learned here, the DOM methods, because I want you guys to get a little bit more used to what JSON is and the basics of JavaScript before we move on to affecting the DOM. And then we'll do that kind of thing next week. If you have any questions, please shoot me an email. Contact me on Teams. Just reach out. I had some questions about the announcement that was like, hey, I've got some missing assignments from a lot of you. If you have a missing assignment, there will be a 0 in there right now. So that 0 is a placeholder until I get that assignment turned in, because I had to put in midterm grades. And I want you to have a more realistic expectation of, if I don't turn in anything from this point, this is what my grade is. Also, make sure to look at the assignments for extra credit. If you want a free assignment, so the extra credit is worth 100 points. So, and all it is either registering for fall or summer term, or if you're graduating, just letting me know that you've submitted your petition to graduate. And then you get that free 100 points, and you can either use it to not do an assignment, or you can use it to boost your grade, however you want to do it, but it's free points. Come on. But that's all I've got for today. I will see you all next week. Have a great rest of your week. Bye.